Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Trainers Forum presented by HRD Specialized K9 Training. Tonight's guest is Dr. Michele Maughan from Scientific Canine Solutions. And tonight is February 28th, 2021, and I am Paul Martin, your host. As I already mentioned, Michele is coming to us from Scientific Canine Solutions. And not only does Michele come to us as a researcher, she comes to us as a canine handler and has the experience being on that end of the leash and not just simply being in a lab. Dr. Maughan's research or background started off with a desire to become a vet and realizing that she wasn't necessarily cut out to be a vet with the day-to-day small animal practice. And that led her to a career that has produced some wonderful work and now some wonderful scientific research and an innovative product in the TAD, which is the acronym for the Training Aid Delivery Device. So I know everybody didn't join on here tonight to listen. Any further ado, I'm going to turn everything over to Michele.
Good evening, everyone. Paul, thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to chat with your crew tonight. So a lot of times I talk about the life of a training aid, and with narcotics and explosives, those training aids have quite a life before they reach your doorstep. And that is true for SAR HRD training aids as well. However, you're not really in control of any of that part of the process. So what is in your control is once you have those training aids in your possession. And that comes down to how you assemble your canine kit in terms of levels of containment and the storage conditions in which you put your training aids, how you handle them in training and operations, and then the life cycle of when you choose to rotate out those training aids. So in a canine kit assembly, we talk about levels of containment. And to keep this reasonable, we try to talk about good, better, best, because we realize that in our laboratory environment, we have the ability to keep pristine conditions, or we have a great budget sometimes, or we have plenty of time or lots of people to handle things and lots of resources. However, we know that that's not necessarily true for the rest of the canine community. In fact, we're the oddity, right? We're the outlier. So whenever we are educating the rest of the canine community or just doing any sort of outreach, we don't want to come across as being so far removed from what you all are doing. And so we present a lot of different options, and we can give you something that can just improve if anything can improve your methods just one little bit, that's a step in the right direction, going from good to better and to best. So in primary containment, a lot of the options that we've had for canine training aids were pretty not so great, to put it mildly. we were left with cotton scent bags, metal sniffer tins, sometimes it looks like a little film canister. I guess in HR, I found out that you all were using suet cages, sometimes mason jars with holes drilled into the top. And so in doing a lot of my research, none of those options were going to suffice for some of the threats or training aids that I was working with. And so that was how the TAD came to be, the training aid delivery device. The next step for a canine kit assembly is what we call secondary containment. And that typically ends up being bags or jars. And then we work to tertiary containment. This can often double as containment or transport. This will look like Pelican cases or sometimes Tupperware. And then quaternary containment, again, that can be containment / transport. Sometimes if you're dealing with a really low vapor pressure or a training aid that's not so smelly, you can get away with primary and secondary containment alone. A lot of the HR training aids are going to require primary, secondary, and tertiary containment, as you all well know. So I thought it was just really interesting learning more about HR training aids. And I read Lorna's paper recently about just some of the variables that affect your training aids. And these are the same sort of variables that we talk about and think about for the traditional explosives and narcotics. And this will do with some of these variables are just time post-mortem. And so that would be the equivalent of, time post-manufacture, or the environmental conditions of season, temp, humidity, et cetera, that will, that affects all training aids. You all have the added benefit of insect colonization and essentially dealing with a living training aid, right? In some ways that your training aids are different every day in some ways. So you do have a lot more of a complex training aid picture that you have to be able to capture and sort of keep an eye on while you're training your dogs and making sure that you're not training them on the, something that's completely unrealistic. So, one of the things I thought was cool about Dr. Irish's paper was about all of the different volatile organic compounds that were identified, and how the a submerged body part would have a different VOC profile than a terrestrial one. And that's not surprising to me. We've seen very similar differences in when we've done headspace analysis or VOC profile analysis on wet versus dry materials in general. I guess some of the assumptions were that, a wet training aid or anything would sort of volatilize things and make them smell more, but actually in the headspace that tends to clamp things down and not let a lot of VOCs into the headspace. So what is neat though is that, you still have 37 of those VOCs in that middle section of that Venn diagram. So in the union space. So those are 37 VOCs that are common to both submerged and terrestrial VOC profiles of those remains. And so because we don't know what dogs are alerting to out of all of those VOCs, or if it's the entire profile, or if it's a ratio of them, it sort of highlights the reason why we need to train on submerged and terrestrial and a variety of different training aids. So I'll introduce, yeah, go ahead. Paul?
A couple of people asked if you could check your screen size.
Yeah, I'm in full presentation
display the
mode.
Full slide, because I'm in
full mode.
Yeah, we're just getting okay. because for some reason we're just getting the presenter's view. Oh well, all I can do is ask. Thank you for trying.
What? Hold on. Let me see if that.
Hey, Michelle, just all the way to the right down there at the bottom, just use that one and that should help you.
The slideshow one, right?
Yeah, try using that one.
Yeah, that's what I was in.
It may be that you're trying to throw it to a different device. That might be what's causing the issue. You may want to try under slideshow up there at the top. There should be an option.
Okay, hold on.
Unclick the presenter view.
Is this better?
Yeah, you got it.
Yes.
Oh, I think it's gonna. Hold on one second. There's a little bit of a lag. A big lag, actually. We'll see if that. Is that good? Oh, yeah, that is. Okay. All right. So this is a breakout diagram of the TAD.
I'm seeing your full screen now.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Of the training aid delivery device. It consists of a glass jar typically, although there's plastic as well because we say, you know, handlers. A gasket, a membrane, which is that's sort of the real business end of the TAD is that semi-permeable membrane. So it's a gas permeable, meaning the VOCs are going to freely emanate through that membrane, but none of your liquids, oils, or solids or powders or anything else that's associated with your training aid other than the gas or the VOCs are going to be able to cross that membrane. A tamper-proof sticker comes with it. It has a unique identifier on there, so you can also use that to label your training aids. The membrane holder is that grid there that will assist in preventing dogs or humans from puncturing the membrane. And then in the lid that can shut off venting that says there, there's also another gasket. And when that is screwed onto the membrane holder, that is able to form a hermetic seal, so a gas tight seal between the lid and the membrane holder. And so that is what allows the training aid, when you're done using it, to stop off gassing onto your other training aids. So that helps reduce or eliminate cross-contamination, as long as you are, like my good friend Dr. Lauren DeGreef says, not letting your odors talk to each other, meaning you're not having multiple training aids open at the same time. And that may be less of an issue in HR. However, it's still something we want to be aware of. So when we talk about multiple levels of containment, primary, secondary, tertiary containment, the TAD functions as primary containment, and as well as your odor delivery device. So that's pretty cool that you can use that as your primary containment. And so you want to then start thinking about your secondary and tertiary containment for your training aid. So we think about why we're going to use TAD for containment. And for its original purpose, we developed it for the US military to contain hazardous materials that were very small in size, down to 0.2 microns. We also had to make sure that it wasn't going to leak in any way. So there was just an obscene amount of testing that was done with liquid and sort of these oily substances to ensure that that filter membrane would not leak. We like using glass as that jar because it's one of the least reactive surfaces that we have available. So we know that there's not going to be any reaction with your training aid and the jar that it's sitting in. And all of once you put your training aid in that jar, everything's really clean. All the components of the TAD are clean to an EPA standard. So you're starting off with a really nice, clean start for your dogs to train on. That's really critical because you want that scent picture to be pretty precise. Paul and I were talking right before the webinar about how we rely so heavily on dogs and their noses, and yet we don't really give them any of the tools that they need to do this wonderful work that they do via their olfaction. So giving them a clear scent picture is really important. And also with HR training aids, you don't want to introduce your source material, which is, I know for you all, very hard to get, and then put it into some container that is not clean. So the TAD has a lot of benefits in terms of containment. Then for prevention of human scent contamination of your training aid substance, it can do that as well. So if you don't use gloves or the outside of the TAD gets contaminated, let's say, with environmental odors from the training aid or the training scenario that you had that day, at the end of your training day, you can completely decontaminate the outside of the TAD from all of those odors. So people have put the TAD, they've submerged it in water, they put it in the bottom of ponds, and they've taken it out days later with leeches on it. The membrane holder has had sort of little marks on it from turtles nibbling on it. It buries very well. And so once you have finished with those hides, you can clean off the TAD and start anew the next day, and your source material is still nice and pristine and clean. So when we're talking about what the TAD is ideal for, it really is for any sort of liquid or powder or these harsh environmental conditions that really the SAR and HR folks have been so great because they have challenged the TAD more than I ever could have in the lab. So, I did a lot of crush testing and drop testing and blowing the TAD up. But you all have done some fantastic work in terms of submerging it to depths beyond what I could have ever imagined, and just really putting it through its paces in the environment. So when you compare the TAD to current technology, there's really not a comparison in terms of, with the TAD, you can turn on and off odor because of its hermetic seals. It can securely contain all sorts of different types of training aids. The TAD also extends the training aid shelf life and service life because that your material is not getting contaminated and it's not continually off-gassing. What's cool too is that you're protecting your hide sites from contamination from your training aids. So if you're given access to someone else's building or warehouse or field, and you're putting your training aids out there, it's pretty cool that you can do that and then know that you're not leaving that area contaminated with your training aid odor or residual material. You can completely decontaminate it, and then negligible background odor. So this one was really important to me in developing the TAD. Every component that we put into the TAD had to meet or exceed the NASA outgassing database standards, meaning if it wasn't able to go into space because it was, either too stinky to be in the space shuttle, then it wasn't going to be part of the TAD. That was important because we didn't want any component of the TAD to outcompete the odor of your training aid. So all the TAD parts are really, really, there's no such thing as odorless, so I'm not going to say that, but the TAD components are very, very, very low outgassing. And yeah, meeting that NASA low outgassing standard is about as rigid or strict as you can get in terms of that criteria. And then lastly, some of our training aids are either dangerous or not ideal to come in contact with. So with the TAD, you can be pretty confident that you're going to be protected, and your dog's can be protected from that training aid. So some of the questions I've gotten from the HR community is, what sort of temperature ranges and operational conditions can I put this TAD in? Can I freeze it? Can I heat it? Can I bury it? Can I submerge it? And so I've fielded a lot of those questions. I've done a lot of that testing, and the answer for the most part is yes. The TAD can go down to minus 80 degrees centigrade all the way up to 40 degrees centigrade. So minus 112 Fahrenheit up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And in operations, I've had some end users bury the TAD up to 3 meters and submerge the TAD up to 3 meters under the water. Beyond 3 meters, there have been reports of the membrane of the TAD slipping off of the gasket and sort of, I guess, imploding. So the TAD then glass jar would fill with water, and the source material would become flooded with the water. And on the right there, there's just an infographic on all of the other tests that we did in order to get the TAD accepted by the various MIL standards for acceptance into the Canine Explosive Scent Kit. And so this was just, drop test altitude, vibration, submersion, low and high temperature. High temperature tests are still pending because the TADs were overloaded. And so this is a really important one for HR SAR. Your training aids are, for the most part, I would consider them like liquid training aids. So you're going to want to have the TAD filled only 50%, maybe 75% of the way full max. That's because you want to account for thermal expansion and contraction. So if your TAD gets into a hot environment, your source material is going to expand, and that can then cause the TAD to burst. In the freezer, same deal. If your TAD is overloaded, or meaning any bit more full than 50%, 70%, your source material will expand, and again, that can disrupt the gaskets, the membranes, etc. So best practice for your training aids is really to keep those TADs about half full. Considerations for kit assembly and packaging. I'm going to sort of breeze through this because I know I'm running short on time, and I want to leave time for questions and answers. So when you're looking at the various criteria for determining if something is acceptable for your secondary, tertiary, quaternary containment, you want to look for these words: moisture vapor transmission rate, which is MVTR, and oxygen transmission rate, which is OTR. And these are what determine watertight and airtight. Those are metrics that will allow you to figure out if that packaging and containment is going to be able to actually contain your training aid odors. The other considerations, though, are that even if it can contain your training aid odors, it may not have the best seal. So the packaging is only as good as its seal. The containment that you're looking at may have an odor itself, which you don't want that odor compromising the odor of your training aid. There's always cost. So there's some really, really fancy new packaging out there that the food industry and pharmaceutical industry are pioneering, except they're crazy expensive. So I've looked into them, but they're just really not practical. And then compatibility with your training aids. So if they're coming in contact with your training aids and you don't really know what the material is, it's a little bit of a gamble. So just keep that take that into consideration. This is just quick graphic. For the most part, steel, aluminum, glass, those are going to have permeation rates that are basically zero. Like nothing's getting through those. Again, the seal is really important. So if you're using a mason jar, nothing's getting through the glass. However, at the top, if you're using those, the regular mason jars with the two-part seals, those aren't going to be able to stop anything. You need to swap those out. But you can see in some of these oxygen transmission rate and water vapor transmission rate things, a lot of times people say, oh, like I just store things in Ziplocs or OPSAC bags or nylon arson bags or whatever it is because they were recommended. But when you look at the actual metrics of the ability for those to contain odors, it's not very good. So what we're using, and this is based in the science, is metallized odor barrier bags and glass jars for secondary and tertiary containment. There's a lot of mylar or metallized odor barrier bags out there that actually don't have a metal layer in them. So you have to, or aluminized layer in there. So you got to watch out for that. And these tertiary containment jars are great. They're big, but they're glass. That's sort of the downside of it. But those glass jars have a metal lid and a layer on the metal lid that makes a nice hermetic seal there. So if you're putting a TAD in an odor barrier bag in that tertiary containment, there's no odor getting out of there. Arrangement of odors. This is important as well. You want to have them physically segregated if possible, or just be careful about co-location of your odors. Watch out for your high vapor pressure odors, and low ones only open one odor at a time, because that is your ripe opportunity for cross-contamination. Training aid storage, best practice is, again, some of those pictures there you can see primary, secondary, tertiary containment. In that first little open Pelican case are 3 of the same training aids that are in that Pelican case, and then in those glass jars. And then they would be nested within another Pelican case, and then that big transport Pelican case is what you can just use to take the training aids for training day. But they wouldn't be stored together. Handling of training aids. We're big into gloves and glove changes. Oftentimes people will be great about using gloves, but then use their gloved hands just like they were using their hands before. And so the gloves are then protecting the handler's hands, but not necessarily controlling for odor. So the gloved hands are just really contaminating everything around them. So while you're focusing on wearing gloves, you also should be focusing on, once I've touched something, my training aid specifically, now that those gloves need to be tossed. So not just gloves, but glove changes. We like to institute a clean person, dirty person, and that helps keep things pretty clear. But again, that's a good, better, best thing, right? We typically have a lot of personnel for that. Order placement, we start with blanks, and then controls, distractors, then targets. In the operational environment, it's absolutely critical that you're not just walking out and placing your training aid. If you do that, you might as well spray paint a line behind you, and X marks the spot of where the training aid is. Your dog is going to not even need to use its nose to follow exactly where you walked and exactly where the training aid is, because that dog can cue on handler odor, fresh disturbance of where you walked, and a whole bunch of other things to figure out exactly where that training aid was. So when you're going and putting out a hide, you need to walk out and put a blank, and then you need to walk out and put a control, and then you need to walk out in the environment and put a distractor, and then you need to walk out and put a target and take a different route back. Think about all of that when you're setting up your training scenarios. And then you want to pay attention to what comes in contact with your training aid along the way, just in case you notice that your dog has a change of behavior on something along the way in the training scenario. So we have a lot of principles that we sort of try and drive home about, just questioning everything. This isn't really applicable to you all, but you definitely do want to preserve odor integrity, have as much blind training as possible. I don't know what your certifications look like, so I'm not even going to touch that. Varied training. I think you all tend to be pretty data oriented already, so good on you. And then it takes a village. I think you guys already know that as well. There's a lot of cross training in your community, so that's pretty awesome. So what's next from the K9 crew? We're working on a cleaning kit. And so I have all of the methods and materials on how we clean TADs, which have been validated by all of our military working dog experiments. So when we reuse Ray Allen scent boxes or anything else, we have been able to decontaminate those materials with the cleaning products and protocols that I have on our website. So we're working on potentially making that into a kit. We have the next product coming out will be the Tadpole, which is a mini Tad for more, discreet hiding locations. We have the diabetes alert dog sampling kits for kids with type 1 diabetes that will be able to with more structure be able to get their saliva samples to start training their diabetes alert dogs. Tomorrow starts our social media challenges of the month, so you can look out for that on the face space and or Instagram, if I can figure out how to use that, and lots of stickers and fun stuff. So if you have any questions at all, I am always available at contact@sci-k9.com, or you can look up much more information on the website. And I will be happy to take any questions from any of you all right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Great information that you've packed into the last 30 minutes. It's so critical what you were pointing out about, keeping track of records and things like that. And that's one of the main things that we as an industry have to do better with is keeping track of, that provenience, where things came from, where, how long we've used something, and where things have gone. Keeping up with those records. I like your graphic on showing how to place so many, the blank, the control, all of those, and creating different paths throughout your search to produce that contamination through there. I think that's wonderfully great information. So the floor is open for questions, both here on the Zoom and over on Facebook. Tonight we've got Hannah Davis that's kind of monitoring over there on Facebook. As she noted, I've got some weather related concerns here. I've already been knocked off. And so, yeah, one of the first questions I will say that came in on here was from Anne for you, Michelle, was, does the color of the lid itself matter? And then I think I was actually knocked off with the second question, best way to clean the grid and the membrane.
Yeah. Okay. So the color of the lid does not matter. The original, I think that graphic was from one of the earlier versions, when the lid was black, and now the lid is white. But no, it does not matter. The best way to clean the grid and membrane, it depends what you've done to it. But I've done probably the most aggressive clean that I've had to do is when I was challenged to submerge a tad in a vat of peanut butter. And so getting that clean after the peanut butter experiment was pretty difficult. So peanut butter was all within the grid and membrane area. You can use, so I ran it under sink water. And that proved to be pretty successful for getting rid of most of the bulk material. And then I used a pretty soft bristle brush and the Liquinox material that I recommend. It's a sort of detergent to scrub the grid. And then there are these dental picks that have sort of a soft tip that I was able to use to dig out anything that was left in the grid or on the membrane. But it was actually more rugged than I thought it might be, both the membrane and the grid.
Okay. Another question, this one comes from Facebook. What would you use or consider a control in
Okay, yeah.
your order
So
of
I'm realizing I've confused everyone with that. So so the blank would be an empty tad, or and what your containment is, anything associated with the training aid and the scent picture that's not the training aid. So that is the blank. So that would be if you put the tad in a stainless steel scent can and you have a tad, you would want to put out a stainless steel scent can, you would want to put out a tad, but those would be empty, right? So those would be controls. And then, or sorry, blanks. And then controls would also be like, you want to put gloves out. If you're handling things with gloves, there's something that is associated with the process or the handling of your training aid, but is not the training aid. And then target is the actual training aid. Distractors can be things of high vapor pressure to see if your dog is going to alert to novelty, or food or other things that you want to proof your dog off of, or anything like if you are looking to proof your dog off of, let's say, the fresh disturbance. So you would like dig a hole or something and then, put a crayon in there, something, it's anything that could be a potential distraction to your dog. I hope that clears that up. But yes, they all fall into non-target odors. Blanks, controls, distractors are non-target odors. And they're more nuanced. Right. They really come into play when you're doing a test and evaluation, not as much so when you're training. But they're things you want to sort of keep an eye on if you want to pass a certification.
Very much so. And one of the things that I think is important about like your presentation and the presentation from Dr. DeGreef last month is making sure that we are using terminology and using the correct scientific terminology within the discipline, within the field, because one of the things that as we continue to push these disciplines forward, we are trying to develop more of the scientific basis for them. I think this is very important for our community to learn this terminology. So Nancy writes, how long does the seal on the container bags last?
Okay, it depends. If you're careful with them, you'll notice that there's sort of two parts to it. And so if you're pulling them apart carefully right along the seal, they'll last quite a while, probably a couple hundred openings. If you open them right from the top part of the seal, like not like right at the top of the bag, that's when they've been sort of coming off or apart from the bag. I've gotten new bags though recently that have what they call like a child-proof seal. It's a double seal, and those have proven to be much more rugged. So those are lasting hundreds of openings.
Okay. Suzanne writes, I think I heard you say that our belief that sources off-gassing more in a wet environment is not necessarily accurate.
Is that in reference to Dr. Irish's paper?
I think that's what she's referring to.
Yeah. So that we've seen that in our headspace analysis, and then Lauren saw the same thing, that the wetted material in general does not produce as many VOCs in the headspace as dry material does.
Another question from Facebook. I live at 8,000 feet above sea level. When training at lower elevations, any concern bringing sealed tads down in elevation? What about going back up to higher elevations?
I think if you're doing it, I mean, at the speed you're doing it, probably no, unless you're, shooting them into the air with like a t-shirt gun cannon thing. I think it'd be fine. It'll probably equilibrate fairly quickly. So I don't have any concerns. But if that happens and something goes awry, please let me know. I love collecting all of the feedback and data from all of you.
And are you asking the name of the paper or the name of the researcher? That's Dr. Lorna Irish.
Yeah, Dr. Lorna Irish is the researcher that did the porcine remains paper. Are you Paul, are you making this presentation available?
Yes, this is available.
Okay, then yes. Dr. Lorna Irish's reference is on one of the early slides.
And I believe I have actually shared that paper on the Facebook page, or a link to where that paper is once before. From Facebook also, how long can you store placenta or cremated remains? What is the typical source life expectancy in a tad or not in one?
Paul, do you know how to answer that one?
Right now, I think that's one of the things that we're in the process of currently learning is truly, I will say, in looking at the sources that I have in using the tabs, especially with soft tissue, they do seem to be holding consistency better than using some of our traditional means of trying to store them just in mason jars and things like that. One of the key things though about this is the sheer ability to be able to take some set up a problem and not have to worry about my odor source becoming contaminated. It's when our odor sources become contaminated a lot of times with other bacteria, contaminated from other materials, that we start seeing advanced breakdown more so than just by the source by itself.
I think Paul's been kicked off, but let's just move on until he gets back. Another question from Facebook. I love my tads. I submerge them in water. No water gets in. Absolutely amazing. The seals all seem to be fine, but I still have odor with the tad capped. If I use smaller samples, will it make a difference?
So the tad cap, you can, inside the tad cap is a gasket that if you simply screw on the tad cap and you don't sort of give it that extra bit of sort of half turn torque, you're not going to get that hermetic seal. However, some of the HR training aids are extremely stinky. And so that's why no matter what, with any sort of containment, we recommend secondary or tertiary containment. So like the metallized odor barrier bags or the tertiary containment. So, you know, we do know that there's some odors that are simply just too volatile to be contained in certain containment options.
I will jump back in here now that I'm back on. I will say that all of my TADs that have material in are stored both in the metallicized bags and the tertiary jars, and do not have an issue with odor. But one of the things that I'm trying to do is always trying to make sure that my storage box is stored flat when I'm transporting it, that I'm not storing it up on its side. And with that, I'm making sure that when I pull and open a jar up, that I'm not opening that jar up over my box, okay, and over that area. I'm removing it completely away from that, because one of the things that can happen is if you open everything up right there over your box, get everything out right there over your box, even though you don't necessarily recognize, oh, I've got odor right here, and we close it back down. Well, the story I like to share a lot of times is me going into work in the afternoons while it's nice and hot, and parking down below the decom facility and not noticing any odor at all available down there, and go into the facility, come out. Obviously, my sense of smell is absolutely blown out of water because I've been in there for 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, sometimes longer. And I've left my windows cracked because it's hot. Drive home, come out the next day, and what do I smell? I smell decomp. Okay. So we have to be mindful of making sure that we are not creating that cross contamination. Does that make sense?
Hey, Paul, can I show video, or sorry, of how to store the TADs in the nested containment?
Yes.
Okay, so Pelican case. This is, can you all
Yep.
see me?
Let me see if I can get it where you can share yourself.
I love sharing myself.
I won't stop share for a moment. Okay. There you go.
Okay, so this is Pelican case 1150. You can nest a whole bunch of these bad boys into a larger Pelican case. Inside of here is this tertiary containment jar. Inside of the tertiary containment jar is a metallized odor barrier bag. And then inside the metallized odor barrier bag is where you can have a tad. This one has another thing in it, but essentially you put the tad in metallized odor barrier bag. These are the new seals that I'm talking about. You see that orange double seal. Plug that up. Smash it in there. And then that can go in the fridge or freezer, wherever you store them after that. If you have low vapor pressure or training aids that aren't that stinky, you can use a Pelican case like the 1120. Put 2 or 3 tads in there, depending on what orientation you want them in. And then you have metallized odor barrier bag. And this is not a tad, but same size and idea. Hopefully that gives some idea of the sort of physics of it all.
Okay, so question: if a tad becomes damaged, can a replacement for the damaged part be purchased?
So we offer replacement jars. So the bottom part with glass or plastic. We offer replacement caps, the top part if you break a cap. But the middle section of the tad, that's basically the entire, that's the tad. So if that part gets damaged, then you need to get a new tad.
Suzanne asked, can you go over once again how you would store a tad jar? You just demonstrated this inside the metal bag plus a glass jar. Transport a tad to a training location. How does a Pelican fit into that? Okay. Hopefully, Suzanne, you got that straightened out from Cindy. If part of we just addressed that. Paul, did you use tab for dry bones? Yes, I do use tads for dry bones. I was talking to Michelle beforehand that I need some supersized tads for some of my stuff. And I'm really interested in the tadpoles for some of my stuff as well.
These
And
little guys.
I would perfect. I like it. I like it. But yes, do I do that for each training aid? Personally, I would love to do that for almost all of my training aids, but at the same point in time, I know I also have to present the odor in different ways to the dog sometimes. And I've got some material that just is not going to fit inside of a tad. That's what we, have already addressed. So yeah, there's a lot of ways I do use it, but I do believe it is the way that we as an industry need to be moving, and try to use with the majority of our sources, so that we can present the cleanest odor profiles to our dogs. But it can't be the only way we present odor profiles to our dogs.
Agreed.
And I don't think Michelle's trying to say that's the only way we need to
No.
present it to our
No.
dogs either.
No, I agree. I think multiple containment are a good idea.
So thank you, Rachel. Stay safe. Joy, I'll answer this. You can find those metallized odor barrier bags right there on the K9 website. Along with everything else. Does the foam in a Pelican case off gas? The simple answer in life is that pretty much everything off gases. If it exists, it is producing in general some type of odor. Okay. And so that's why we have to be so intentional with our training with our dogs and understand that if I use this, well, I've got to proof off that.
Right.
Another couple of questions. So wet versus dry, you add an additional jar. I'm not really following that question, but all of my material is packaged. I've got the TAD in the bag, in a jar, solid lid, tertiary environment, inside a Pelican case. Okay, Gene, that's a good question. If you used a makeup pad to create a odor transfer, how long would you use that original pad before putting a newer one into the TAD?
Yeah, so we use the Whatman papers.
That's a little bit.
Have you used these, Paul?
No, I have not.
Okay, so when my TAD is not in use, I put one of these in the top and then seal it up and put it in its containment and put it wherever, fridge, room temperature, wherever it is. When I'm ready to train the next day, next week, whatever it is, I have, what I say, 2 training aids. I have the actual material here, and then I have a Whatman paper that is an odor soak, right? Soaked with the training aid odor that is off gas from here on here. And this is disposable. I consider this one-time use. I can cut it in half if I'm trying to do lower amounts of odor, whatever I want. I can also fold it, put it in the crevice of a vehicle or wherever I want, places that I can't actually get a TAD. But in terms of how long would you use the original pad before putting a newer one? So I don't put, well, this is a sort of a demo one. But typically I wouldn't put one of these in there, but if you wanted to, I have recommendations in terms of what kind of, I wouldn't use a makeup pad, I would use a certain kind of gauze. But we have human scent that has lasted a really, really long time on gauze or on clothing. And so depending on what you need it for, it's good for a very, very long time, depending on how many times you need to open and close these. Unless, Paul, you had a different answer.
Typically, once I set up a TAD, my belief is, that TAD is set. I'm not actually using a makeup pad or using or putting a scent transfer or an odor transfer into the TAD itself. I'm doing an odor transfer so that I can put the transferred pad somewhere and not have contamination issues and things of that nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, any other questions from Facebook land? I know we're right at 10 minutes after the hour. I know we were a little bit late starting. Thank y'all for bearing with me with my weather related issues. Thank y'all for all the great questions. Okay, so everybody, because I know a lot of people, they watch the live session, they want to go back and watch it again or take more extensive notes, things like that, or share it with somebody. All of our trainers forum sessions are available on our YouTube channel. You can search for HRD Specialized K9 Training there on YouTube. I ask you take a moment, go there, subscribe to it. That way, if you miss a trainers forum session, guess what? When I upload it, you will get the notification that the new trainers forum has been uploaded. There's a new video. You can watch it. Take a moment. If you ask questions on any of those, I will answer that or get back to you about those. So please take a moment, do that. Wealth of information. This is like episode 14, if we want to call them episodes. So thank you, Michele, for joining us tonight. Next month, we will have Dr. Cheryl Johnston. She is a board certified forensic anthropologist and actually one of my mentors, also one of my colleagues. She will be joining us on Sunday, March 28th at 8 p.m. So I appreciate everybody for joining us tonight. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, psmartin@hrdspecializedk9.com. Also visit hrdspecializedk9.com for future classes, future trainings. I would also like to do a shout out to Hannah and Robin for being willing and able to help out tonight. And again, another big thank you to Michele for a great presentation and taking the time to answer all of these questions. So in the meantime, everybody, please stay safe, be good to each other, and most importantly, don't lick anything. It's not good for your health.